Welcome everyone near and far to another exciting episode here on Stories Lost. In this episode, we are especially proud to have been invited to share a baffling experience provided by one of our viewers, Csaba David. Csaba took the initiative to write to us and offered to share with us a personal experience of encountering the unexplained. We were all too happy to learn from Csaba about this lesser-known incident and get his and his family's first-hand information. To ensure that we do justice to his story, we will closely follow his account, allowing him to explain the events in his own words and through the captivating illustrations he created 4 years ago. In his correspondence with Stories Lost, Csaba tells us that in 1991, he had a UFO sighting of the first kind in and around the region of Szolnok, a small city in Hungary. This event left a lasting impression on him, and even spooked his father, a professed staunch skeptic of anything paranormal. The sighting was corroborated by outside sources, as it was reported in regional papers, picked up on radar, and observed by personnel at the main Air Force base in Kecskemét, in Hungary. At the time of the incident, Csaba was 6 years old, and the event has remained a vivid memory, always discussed around the dinner table whenever the paranormal was brought up. 4 years ago, he chose this experience as the subject for a university illustration project, hoping to document it in detail and capture his family's reactions, including those of his father and brother, who also witnessed the object. Indeed, in January 1991, there was a bright flying object in the Hungarian sky, observed from several parts of the country, including Kecskemét. In January 20th, 1991, on the front page of the Hungarian newspaper Career, the spokesperson for the Hungarian Defense Forces told reporters without a shred of humor that, on Friday, 10 minutes before midnight, a UFO was in Hungarian airspace. It was observed from various parts of the country. The officers on duty at the Kecskemét Air Unit also saw the UFO moving about 300 meters above the runway, traveling at a speed of approximately 300 kilometers per hour. However, in the same short article, an employee of the Urania Observatory puts forward that the phenomenon was likely a meteor. A mystery swiftly resolved. Many a reader of the time would have agreed as they skimmed forward, creasing the ink-heavy pages looking for something more newsworthy. Yet, there it was again, on the front page when they closed the folds. But for those that witnessed the phenomenon with their own eyes, doubts were not dispelled. Were the authorities truly confident in their assessment? How can an army base raise the alarms to that extent simply because of a passing meteor, moving at a relatively low speed? There were those, the David family being one of many, who were not assured by the newspaper's assertions, having witnessed the strange phenomenon with their own eyes. At the time of the event, my family and I lived on the 5th floor of a large 10-story socialist-style apartment block. This block was part of a large housing estate in the city of Szolnok, a small and fairly typical Hungarian city located about 50 miles southeast of Budapest. I particularly remember this night because my dad was excited about a popular Hungarian political comedy airing on TV. My brother and I begged him to let us stay up and watch it with him. After some persistent pleading, he eventually agreed, although I'm sure he was convinced we'd fall asleep halfway through, since a political satire about the communist regime isn't exactly riveting entertainment for a 6- and 10-year-old. We didn't fall asleep, but we certainly didn't understand much of it either. Little did we know that our boredom would soon turn into full-fledged excitement, though not because of the movie. If I remember correctly, a little after halfway through the film, somewhere between 10 and 11 p.m., a strangely illuminated object caught our attention outside the window, which was quite large, was to the left of the bed where the three of us were sitting. The living room was divided, serving as both a living room and my parents' bedroom. Upon spotting the object, my dad instantly jumped up, ran to the window, and then out onto the balcony, exclaiming something along the lines of, "What on earth is that?" Somewhat shocked and excited, primarily due to my dad's reaction, my brother and I also jumped up and followed him onto the balcony, For a few seconds, we watched in awe as this thing slowly and silently glided across the sky, heading southwest. The object was traveling at an approximate altitude of 300 meters and was large, definitely larger than any commercial or military aircraft. I also remember it emitting an oddly illuminated, dark, reddish, powder-like substance. I say oddly because it wasn't actually illuminated, yet it was still easily visible against the dark sky. The best I can describe it is like the colored powder thrown during India's Holi festival, but in the dark. Once again, it was strangely visible while not being luminous. It was very weird. The object itself consisted of two large glowing orbs, one in the front and the other in the back, connected by a long, thin horizontal strip of light in the middle, which was slightly dimmer than the orbs. A few seconds after spotting the object, my dad, somewhat frantically, told me to get my mom, who had fallen asleep while reading on the couch. As I was waking her up and urging her to quickly get to the balcony, while still half asleep and unaware of what all the fuss was about, my brother and dad witnessed the object suddenly accelerate and disappear over the horizon in the same direction it had been heading. Strangely, we all felt that the sudden disappearance was somehow linked to my mother waking up, as if the object had sensed that it had been spotted by another, more credible witness. Witnessing the object was strange enough, but what made the experience even more bizarre was that a few days later, it was reported in a regional newspaper that radar personnel and other staff at one of Hungary's main Air Force bases, in the city of Kecskemét, had also spotted and temporarily tracked an unidentified object at the same time and date. Incidentally, Kecskemét is in the same direction the object we witnessed was heading. I remember my parents picking me up from school and casually discussing the newspaper report with other parents and my teachers. On the way home, they showed me the article and explained what all the excitement was about. As a 6-year-old, my reading skills were still developing, but I vividly remember seeing the big letters in the headline spelling out UFO. Apart from being weird and exciting, I also felt somewhat validated, as my teacher, her assistant, and the other children had dismissed my retelling of the story as childish gibberish earlier in the day. I remember being laughed at and my story being brushed off as the product of a child's overactive imagination. Little did I know, they would be proven wrong, and that kind of felt good. This was in 1991, and there was no internet to look up further information. At the time, whatever news there was to learn came from newspapers or TV. Information traveled slowly, and our sources were limited to what was broadcast locally, or what we could find in print. Moving to a new country in 1993 added another layer of distance from what was happening back home. Although we had a television, it was impossible to access Hungarian channels in Kuwait, which meant that we missed many updates and news reports that aired in the years following the sighting. One such update was a Hungarian news segment, which featured fighter pilot Gábor Tóth, who was on duty at the Kecskemét military airport on January 18, 1991. This report, which we never saw, could have provided valuable insights into that mysterious night, but it remained out of our reach for many years. On the broadcast, fighter pilot Gábor tells the reporter, "Well, it was pretty late at night, a little after 11 o'clock. We were watching a movie on TV, and next to the TV there was a window. Suddenly, a strange light appeared outside the window, which caught our attention. We opened the window and were amazed by what we saw. It was an incredible sight, and there was no sound at all." The reporter then asks for a clarification of the height, likely aiming to determine if the object was within the typical flight altitude range, which could help in identifying whether it was a known aircraft or something entirely different. Well, it's quite difficult to judge because it was night, and there wasn't much to compare it to. But I've seen quite a few flying objects in my life. I think this one was at a height of 300 to 400 meters. It could be compared to a plane in the process of lining up. Airplanes often used to line up there at about the same altitude and speed. "So no way in the vicinity of 10-kilometer altitude?" the reporter continued to ask. Captain Gábor Tóth answered, "No, I don't think it's realistic, because the one certain thing we could see was that this flying object had a very high angular velocity. When it was close to us, it appeared to be moving fast. As it moved away, its angular velocity gradually decreased, which suggests that it was relatively close." The reporter again, "Could you hear any sound?" Captain Gábor said, "No, no." The interesting thing about the whole situation was that there was complete silence. Nothing could be heard. We saw a very dark mass, and on the back of it, there was something like a very flat, narrow opening. From this opening, a light like that of arc welding, completely blinding white, was visible. Some kind of gas-like substance was flowing out of this opening, and it was glowing, but it didn't resemble any earthly phenomenon. It wasn't like a flame or fire, it was more like the air itself was glowing. The reporter probes further. What do you think it could be? From what you've said, it seems you've never encountered a similar aircraft or flying device before as a pilot. No, I've never encountered anything like this before. It was surprising. Now, if we're talking about UFOs, it depends on how we define the term, but it was clearly an unidentified flying object, at least for me, Captain Gábor states. For Csaba and his family, the discovery of the TV show was yet another puzzle piece, serving as tangible evidence that their awe and wonder were rooted in something truly extraordinary. Csaba reminds us, "It should be known that my dad is a total skeptic when it comes to all things paranormal or anything supposedly out of this world. I remember him once saying that he'd only believe in extraterrestrials or UFOs if they landed on his lawn and shook hands with him. However, regarding this experience or sighting, to this day, he still considers it one of the strangest things he's ever seen, something he certainly can't explain." Thank you, Csaba, for sharing this experience with all of us who are curious about the fringes of science and the unexplained. When we at Stories Lost followed your links, dipped into the Black Vault, and browsed news outlets and ufology blogs, the bits and pieces of information affirmed that an event had indeed occurred. Even though official documents are sparse on details, it is clear that something beyond the ordinary alarmed an army base, registered on radar, and prompted one of the bigwigs to step forward and confirm and validate people's observations. Looking at the documents, your illustrations haunt us, making us twist and turn the maps, scroll the databases, and stare long and hard at every unexpected underlining or emphasis. We know from your correspondence that the fascination endured in your family over the decades, keeping the discussion of alternative theories or corroborative evidence in play. Let's sit down at your historic dinner table and revisit one of the most pervasive attempts at a rational explanation. The family agreed that the most plausible, though still unlikely, earthly explanation was that it might have been an SR-71 Blackbird. There were reasons why the David family felt this idea could be considered, but also why it seemed improbable. During the time period, there were significant global events like the First Gulf War and the escalating tensions in the Balkans, which led to the Yugoslav wars. It's conceivable that the U.S. might have deployed unconventional aircraft, such as the SR-71, alongside planes such as the F-117 and the U-2 during these crises, and they were headed in that direction, albeit with a bit of detour if it was going to the Middle East. The SR-71 was primarily used for reconnaissance, often under the jurisdiction of the CIA or military intelligence. Such missions would have been classified, possibly explaining why no official explanation would be forthcoming if it were indeed an SR-71. Also, the SR-71's speed is one of the few things that could come close to the object's rapid speed. Now for the points against the possibility of an SR-71 Blackbird. Officially, the U.S. Air Force retired the SR-71 in 1989, 2 years before this event. However, some were briefly reactivated until 1999, likely for use by NASA or possibly the CIA. The SR-71 was a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, while the observed object was flying at a much lower altitude, approximately 300 meters, and displayed unusual lights, not typical of any aircraft, let alone one designed for covert operations. The SR-71 was known for being extremely loud, even at lower speeds. At high speeds and low altitudes, it would have produced significant noise, including a sonic boom. Yet complete silence was experienced during the event. Although the SR-71 is a large aircraft, the observed object appeared far larger than a typical passenger jet, making it significantly larger than an SR-71. The object's acceleration was almost instantaneous, shifting from a gentle, effortless slow speed to disappearing over the horizon, 13.8 kilometers away, given a fifth-floor vantage point, in 3 to 5 seconds. While the SR-71 could reach Mach 3+, it required time and high altitude to do so, unlike the near instantaneous acceleration observed during the event. If more answers are out there, if more documents become declassified, if more testimonies resurface, images, anything, what could they reveal? Would they lead to new headlines, spelling out the acronym for Unidentified Flying Object, flashing across screens instead of newspapers in today's world? And would they jar those of us who are unprepared for the consequences? Csaba, we appreciate your contribution to this channel and to our viewers. If we can offer something small as repayment, it is that we are truly riveted and mystified by your experience. Thanks again, and thanks to all our viewers who add to the channel with comments and reported events. Let's stay curious together. This week, we would like to especially thank Bernadetta, Dogface64, Dan, and Airy Rory for treating us to coffee on buymeacoffee.com. We also want to thank the RRR group for their support through our newly opened Patreon. We are extremely grateful for your continuous support. Would you also like to support the channel's work in shedding light on lesser-known UFO cases? Visit us at buymeacoffee.com/storieslost or patreon.com/storieslost. See you next week.